Может быть, очень сложно поверить, что деньги у правительства могут...
What will I have on the background? Okay. Broke 100 epoxy bonds to find the strongest by bps.space.
I'm about to break these two parts, and they're identical except for one key difference. They're from the same sheet of fiberglass, prepped with the same sandpaper, and bonded with the same epoxy in a mold, so they should break around the same strength. What I didn't tell you is this first one was bonded 24 hours after sanding, while the second was bonded right away. If you want strong composite bonds, you have to prepare the surface as well. So how do you do that? Ask 10 composites technicians and you'll get 10 different answers. Some use high grit sandpaper, some use low, some claim isopropyl alcohol is all you need, and others use atomic oxygen generated by plasma discharge. I don't know what's best. I'm a guy on YouTube, so we're gonna test all those things in this video. I want strong bonds in my composite parts. The stuff I'm building has to survive past Mach 3. I'm talking attaching fins, gluing tubes, wet layups, dry layups, etc. If these bonds break, my rocket falls apart, so if there's a way to make them stronger, I wanna know. I've heard lots of advice from well-meaning engineers who all claim they have the best bond preparation techniques, but they all say something different, and I don't know who's right. And I know good preparation is important, but like, how important? Is good bond prep really 4 times stronger? The best way to learn is to simply test it yourself. So let's run the experiment. For this video, I ran almost 100 tests, pushing composite coupons until they broke using this hydraulic press. I measured that result using a load cell to make sure I knew as much as possible about bonding composites together using epoxy. This stuff comes in 2 parts, a resin and a hardener, and when you mix the two together, the epoxy begins to cure. And already before we've begun, we have a variable we need to control for: mixing. How well do you need to mix these two things together for the epoxy to cure fully? The epoxy I'm using here, Loctite E120HP, comes with mix nozzles that mix it for me. But are these really enough? The nozzle swishes these two liquids back and forth using baffles inside. Mixing it this way reduces bubbles, and it means you should be able to apply it directly to the parts. I'm not convinced though. Intuitively, it seems like hand mixing would be more thorough. So let's put it to the test. Let's run the experiment. I'll make 3 test coupons in 3D printed molds, then fill them with epoxy. One batch is epoxy right out of the mix nozzle, and the other batch uses a mix nozzle with extra hand mixing and a little black dye to differentiate them. Although, won't the black dye skew our results? Hold on to that thought for a minute. Each sample was broken in the middle by a point load, a piece of aluminum that I turned on the lathe. There we go, so 4,100 newtons on test sample 1. The ultimate strength for all of them was above 4,000 newtons. The average of the 3 mixed nozzle samples was around 4,200 newtons, and the average of the hand mixing samples was around 4,600, about 7% better. So is it the black dye that increased the strength, or the mixing that increased the strength? Maybe the mixing went up 10% and the black dye reduced it by 3. This is the part of the video where I tell you that I am not an expert and these are not proper tests. Every number you hear in this video is real, but it's anecdotal evidence at best. It's not proof of anything definitive, and here's why. There are many uncontrolled variables in these tests, things like the black dye, side-to-side shifting of the load cell, inconsistent mix technique, etc. But most of all, for each data point in a test, we're usually averaging between 2 or 3 sample articles, while most standards and testing organizations would advocate for at least 5 or 10. I'm not making any of these numbers up, they're all real, but there's a big difference between lab-tested, peer-reviewed data and a guy making YouTube videos in his garage. What I'm here to do is gather a little more data to inform how I build my rockets, and when there are inconsistencies in my testing methodology, I'll try my best to call those out. So as we jump into this, be aware this data is incomplete and should be taken with a grain of salt. But there's still value in incomplete data, and salty food can be good from time to time. Our first test series will evaluate a wide range of bond preparation techniques, and we'll do 2 coupons with each of the following. No prep, 10 seconds of acetone wipe, 1 minute of acetone wipe, 10 seconds of IPA wipe, 1 minute of IPA wipe, then sandpaper in 60 grit, 120, 320, 600, and 1000 grit. After sanding, the surface is wiped clean using lint-free wipes soaked in 99.9% pure isopropyl alcohol. Each of these samples are cut from 1/4-inch fiberglass sheet. I selected this instead of carbon fiber because I had a bunch of it lying around, and it's a little bit cheaper this way. Some of this stuff has black dye in it, and some of it is green. This is an uncontrolled variable.
We've got new stock in today! Come take a look! We've got new stock in today! Come take a look!
And if we were in a lab doing proper tests, this wouldn't fly. But imperfect data can still have value, and since I'm filming this at the end of all the testing, I can tell you with decent certainty the green versus black fiberglass didn't make much of a difference. I cut out 2x3-inch coupons on the Carbide 3D Shapeoko, and after bond prepping them, I placed them in 3D printed molds to allow the epoxy to form into the shape that I wanted. The molds are coated in superlube with a long stick beforehand to act as a mold release so that the epoxy won't bond with the print. After labeling each coupon and putting the epoxy into the mold, I put each test article into the vacuum chamber to remove all the bubbles I could. It usually took a few iterations of this to get the epoxy to not bubble over the top of the mold and spill everywhere. Once cured, the superlube as a mold release kind of worked. It required some extra force to extract it every time, but nothing close to the breaking strength of the epoxy, so I wasn't too concerned. The cracks you hear in these clips are tiny pieces of epoxy fracturing, but most of the bond should be fine. Ooh. You might be wondering by now why we're setting up the test coupons this way. Most composite bond testing is run as single or double lap shear tests. That's where you take the 2 pieces and press the flat plates together, then pull them apart lengthwise and measure the stress and strain. Oftentimes this is done with a fancy machine called an Instron, and you're getting way higher fidelity data than anything we're doing here. But this cantilevered setup isn't very common, and my goal here is to emulate the actual scenario that I'm concerned about, which is a fin snapping off in flight. You can think of this as the body of a rocket and this as the fin of a rocket with some pretty chunky fillets. If this rocket gets a little silly at Mach 4 and it turns to the side, this surface will see a crazy amount of load, and that is what we're simulating. Looking at a cross-section, there's a little bit of everything in this test setup. There's some compression here, some shear here, some tension here. There's a little bit of tension and shear in this area. In hindsight, I wish I had run lap shear tests, because the failure mode for most of these tests was about the same. Each test broke at a different strength, but they all failed by either shearing off at this surface or breaking in some combo of tension and shear around that area. But hindsight is 20/20, and say it with me, imperfect data can still have value. Let's begin. With no bond prep, we get about 3,000 newtons and 1,800. With a 10-second acetone wipe, they both hit just above 3,100, and 60 seconds was a little worse, averaging 2,700. So maybe too much acetone can actually hurt performance. Keep that one in your noggin. IPA performed consistently well in both the 10-second tests and 60-second tests, averaging around 3,300 for both. Sanding is where it gets interesting. My first 60 grit sanding test performed excellent, averaging around 4,000 newtons. 120 grit had a little more deviation and averaged lower at around 3,600. Then it falls off a cliff. 320 grit had enormous deviation between 3,200 and 1,800 newtons. 600 grit averaged 2,900, and the single 1,000 grit test I ran was a pitiful 1,400 newtons. So what can we learn from this? First, I like how consistent the IPA was. Consistency is important, important, and we will come back to that later. Second, I'm impressed by the 60 grit strength, and there does seem to be an inverse correlation between the grit size and the total strength of the bond. It's pretty easy to look at this data and come to the conclusion that lower grits must perform better than higher grits, and once you get up to 1,000 grits, we're essentially polishing the part, so it's no surprise that it broke at a measly 1400 newtons. So far, 60 grit seems to be our strongest performer, so let's dive deeper and find out why.
Yeah, we are going to officially announce that we are proxies. Alright, nice. Wait a second. Okay, everything works. Both people and tools need rest. No big. Can do it tomorrow. Not a problem.
I'm keeping each of these samples in bags with their associated shrapnel. I mean, the epoxy shards that come off. For one of the no prep coupons, it's no surprise these didn't perform well. The glossy surface tells us this is an adhesive failure, i.e. the epoxy delaminated from the surface of the resin in the fiberglass. I do see areas where this isn't the case, which means we probably got lucky on the samples that performed well. I should also mention these parts are still covered in super lube. When I place them in the mold, I'm extremely careful to not let any of the super lube touch the surface. It's possible in all these tests that there's a little super lube contaminating the epoxy, but I largely doubt that this is the case. Looking at the 60-second IPA sample, we see two different failure modes. This is a cohesive failure, which means the epoxy itself broke and it left a little bit on the surface. And on the other piece from this sample, we have a substrate failure. That means the structural epoxy ripped off the top layer of the substrate, or the resin on the fiberglass. For the 60 grit sample, we can see a combination of these two. The epoxy shards are tearing away some of the surface resin from the fiberglass, and there's also still a little epoxy on the surface. Under a microscope, with the 60-second IPA on the right and the 60 grit sandpaper on the left, it's easier to see these two failure modes. For the IPA, we have this total delamination of the resin, so we can see the weave under the substrate. And the 60 grit surface is still rough, which probably contributes to a multimodal failure mode. For my worst performing sample, the 1000 grit, it looks like we had a real fast delamination on the bending piece of fiberglass. And this is consistent with the high-speed footage. The coupon just lets go with very little violence like we see in other brake tests. The top layer of resin almost looks untouched. It almost seems like we had some contamination on the surface, which is strange because I wiped it down with isopropyl alcohol after sanding. But let's take what we can learn from the 60 grit and see if we can get higher than that 4,000 Newton number. On the next round, I prepped 3 sets of dual samples, all with 60 grit sandpaper. The first set were sanded with reasonable pressure until the entire surface went from glossy to matte. This basically ensures the whole surface is fresh, so to speak, and I'm calling these 60 grit till gray. The second set was sanded with 60 grit sandpaper, but much harder this time. I pushed deep into the composite material, hoping to scuff up and expose some of those composite fibers. My thought was that maybe exposing some of those fibers would give us more area to bond with. The third set was sanded like the first. I sanded using moderate pressure until the piece was gray, but then I scored it with a knife. Maybe by allowing the epoxy to seep deeper into these grooves, we'll get a higher bond strength. Low grit sandpaper seems to perform well, so what if we just rough up the surface even further? For each of these samples, after cleaning with IPA, I pushed epoxy directly through the mix nozzle into the mold. Then I let them cure for 48 hours, and now let's break them. The 60 grit till gray averaged 2,750 newtons. The 60 grit hard sanding averaged about 2,100, and the 60 grit till gray with scoring averaged about 2,750, just like the first, though with a much wider deviation between the two samples, so we've got less consistency when scoring is involved. All 6 of these tests were far worse than the 4,000 Newton average from the first 2 60 grit tests. Something is consistently off here, and I think I know what it is. Vacuum degassing. During the first round of tests, I degassed in the mold, but I found that it made loading the epoxy much less consistent, so I neglected it on this more recent round. The vacuum chamber made the epoxy expand so much that it bubbled out and over the mold, which meant I had to refill the epoxy, then re-degas in a couple of steps until that stopped happening. So I tried this round of tests without it, which is another inconsistency, but that can be okay so long as we're aware of it. Skipping the vacuum step means the epoxy might have lots of tiny bubbles within it, and it's probably not mixing as well. well. So what can we learn from this round? First, vacuum degassing is important. I think that even if the mix nozzle is doing a good job and there aren't many air pockets, we're still getting further mixing when those bubbles come out through the vacuum degas process. If I had to guess, using my data alone, it looks like vacuum degassing can add as much as 25% strength into the epoxy. Further, hard sanding seems like it can reduce the strength of the bond. Sanding with a medium force until the surface is gray seems best, and although scoring can help, it can also hurt. There's a very wide split with the scoring results. And here we go again, talking about consistency. It's very important, and hand sanding makes consistency hard to get. So what if there's a method of bond preparation that doesn't require sanding? Whoa, did that guy just fall down a well? Hey man, are you alright down there? Yeah. At the very start of this project, I was secretly hoping to find a method of bond prep that didn't involve sanding, because for the larger rockets that I want to build in the future, that's a lot of surface area that needs to be bond prepped. And as I looked for solutions, something interesting showed up. I started finding details on the use of atomic oxygen to activate a surface for bond preparation, and boy oh boy, is this a deep rabbit hole you can go down. I think usually I'd avoid this type of thing, but this is a long video. If you've made it this far, you know it's gonna get weird. Let's go down the rabbit hole. Every solid has a surface energy, and we can think of this as how hungry that surface is to bond with other things. If you've seen water turn into beads on a freshly waxed car, that's because the wax has a very low surface energy, and from a technical perspective, that means the surface tension of the water is higher than the surface energy of the wax. But when the surface energy is high, the water wants to spread out a lot more. High surface energy objects aren't as common, so usually we have to do something to activate that surface. And to raise that surface energy, what we're gonna do is take all those happy bonds on the surface of a material and ruin their day. These bonds might be formed with oil and dirt and grease, and if they're completely closed, they're just not gonna be open to receiving anything new. We need to break as many of these bonds as possible so they can bond instead with the epoxy. Using solvents to clean off contaminants on the surface can break some of these bonds and raise the energy a little bit. Sandpaper breaks these bonds almost by definition. When we're etching until the surface is completely gray, we can be sure that we've etched away to fresh material. But there's another way to do it. You can also use plasma, and specifically the atomic oxygen that is generated within the plasma discharge. I promise not to get too deep into the weeds here, but atomic oxygen is crazy. Normal oxygen, like we're breathing right now, is O2. It's two atoms of oxygen bonded, but atomic oxygen is just one of them, and boy oh boy is he hungry. He's unstable and has high energy, and he wants to bond with literally anything that can get him to a lower energy state. When one of these guys runs into anything it can oxidize, it does, and it releases a lot of that energy in the process, which can break molecular chains around whatever it hits. This isn't just a bond prep thing. Atomic oxygen is a big challenge for spacecraft in low Earth orbit. There's a lot of atomic oxygen in the upper atmosphere, specifically in the thermosphere. Spacecraft in orbits around there are getting slowly eaten by atomic oxygen constantly. So back to bond prep. We can use this atomic oxygen to etch away the material at a molecular scale, but we're also cleaning it. The hungry oxygen atoms want to bond with everything, which means they'll bond with oil, dirt, any contamination, and they'll carry it away. Atomic oxygen is incredible because it's like we're sanding and cleaning with IPA at the same time. So, probably don't try this at home. High voltage is very dangerous, but if we take a high voltage source and create an arc across two leads, that arc is going to be made of plasma. And the concentrated energy within that plasma is enough to break apart and dissociate the oxygen in the air around it. So we've got some atomic oxygen in there. Then, if we take a vacuum hose and hook it up to the outlet of a vacuum and blow air across that arc to force it down these long steel leads, we aren't just lengthening the plasma, we're making it last longer, and we're also blowing that atomic oxygen out the end of this gliding arc. This is called gliding arc discharge, and it, kind of worked. You can test surface energy using a water break or contact angle test, and we've done this in past videos before. By putting water droplets on the surface of a material that you've just recently prepped, if the water spreads out and has a very low break angle, that means the surface is pretty active. It has a high surface energy and it's ready to bond with. I used contact angle tests to measure the results of the gliding arc discharge setup, and I could never get consistent results. Sometimes I managed to get good results, but that was only after 10 or 15 minutes of of consistent application to the same spot. That's not a very high potency for bond preparation, and in terms of the time involved and the size of the parts that I'm working with, sanding an IPA is going to be way faster. I'm also not stoked about the idea of adding kilovolts of electrical potential to my bond prep process, so I think we need a new approach. Generating plasma using electricity is one way to go about it, but you know what else is plasma? There's a bit of atomic oxygen within this, as well as other reactive species that can help break apart the hydrocarbon chains within the resin of the composite you're trying to bond to. That's going to raise the surface energy, just like gliding arc discharge. That's enough, thank you. We can see the effect of this not just through contact angle of water droplets, but with these Dyne test pens that are designed to wet out at different surface energies, letting you know just how effective bond prep was. After slowly treating the bottom half of this fin with a few passes of a butane torch, the pens clearly indicate the transition from low surface energy to high surface energy. The obvious downside here is heat. While gliding arc discharge is a non-thermal plasma, so it can't burn the part, this is pretty thermal. Most epoxy resins aren't rated to anywhere near this temperature, so for this to work, you need short, fast passes at a controlled distance from the part. And if you get that wrong, even a little bit, you will burn off the top layer of resin, compromising the strength of the substrate, and probably scrapping the part entirely. The smoke means you're not going to space, and I viewed the flame treatment as a little too risky for me. If the options are kilovolts of electricity, an open flame, or sanding, I'm gonna pick sanding every time. Something I've always heard is that you need to prep the surface you're bonding to as close to the bond time as possible. I've been told that if you wait more than a few hours between prepping and bonding, you're giving up a lot of potential strength, and I believe this. You can find lots of published data that supports this idea, but lab data isn't always representative of your particular situation, and I'd love to find those numbers myself, so let's do it. Let's run the experiment. We're going to prep 16 samples tested in pairs at discrete times: 74 hours, 49, 24, 7, 3, 1.5, and immediate bonding. Leading up to the bond, I prepped each sample at the right time so that I could glue them together all at once. After sanding each sample, I wiped it clean with isopropyl alcohol, then let it sit in the corner of my garage until it was time to bond. I didn't do anything else in the garage during testing, so the environment should be free of mold release, cutting fluid, machine oil, or other contaminants. I mixed the epoxy extra good in a cup beforehand with a drop of black dye, then vacuum degassed it in the cup. Then I poured that epoxy into each mold and vacuum degassed again to try and get the most consistent performance from each sample. These samples should be absolutely identical apart from two variables. The first is the time between the prep and the bond. That's the variable we're controlling for. And two is the sanding itself. You can't hand sand something the same exact way every time. And in an effort to fight this and get more consistency, about halfway through the testing I switched to an orbital sander, which provides hopefully more consistent results. I regret doing this in hindsight as it tarnishes the data I was hoping to capture, but if we see a significant change between the orbital sander and hand sanding, we'll kind of know what's up there. And that's enough yapping from me, let's break them. Alright, at 74 hours we've got 2600 and 3500, averaging 3100 newtons. At 49 hours we have a wider split with an average of 2700, and at 24 hours we have an extremely wide split averaging 1900. That lower bound is our worst result yet at 1100 newtons, which is worse than the 1000 grit sandpaper. Ouch! If what I've heard is true, as the prep to bond time goes down, the strength should go up. So it makes sense to me that these early results aren't great, but let's keep going. At 11 hours, we have two solid results averaging about 3,500 newtons, and at 7 hours, another two strong ones averaging 3,300. At 3 hours is where I switched to the orbital sander, and we have a big split between 1,700 and 2,900, averaging 2,300. At 1.5 hours, we have a smaller split averaging 2,750, and the immediate bond test dropped to an average of 2,300. These results are very messy, but I think we can still learn from them. First, I don't think there's enough data here to draw any strong conclusions. Straight up. There's just not enough statistical significance when each test only has 2 samples. If we're looking for trends, we should be careful not to look too closely. When I set up this test, I was A, hoping for more consistency in the results as a whole, and B, hoping that we'd see a way clearer correlation between the time between prep and bond and the strength of the bond. That's why I felt okay running 2 samples per test, but I do think there's still a little bit we can learn from this. While I don't see trends, I still see possibilities. It is obviously possible to get a strong bond with 74 hours between your prep time and your bond time. And in the same vein, it's obviously possible to get a weak bond if you bond immediately. There are lots of factors at play. This should be obvious by now. If I squint and look for trends, it does seem like the orbital sander is less consistent, especially because we'd expect the more recent results to be stronger than these. And it's kind of hard to ignore that a lot of the data after 12 hours is all over the place. This data is incomplete and it's imperfect. It still has value, but we should be really careful not to draw strong conclusions from it. What we should do instead is collect more. I started to think a little harder about how the orbital sander works, and it's in the name. It sands in an orbit with tiny little swirls. The sander vibrates while rotating the sandpaper, and that creates lots of little swirls on the surface. For hand sanding, I had largely moved my hand back and forth in straight lines. The difference here is that with a large enough area and a distributed load, the orbital sander probably leaves a flatter surface overall, whereas hand sanding cuts deeper grooves. It's as if the orbital sander is creating tons of micro scratches in a uniform surface, whereas linear sanding cuts deeper and likely results in more surface area for the epoxy to bond with. I might be falling for the coastline paradox here, and that's always how I've heard it described from experts in composites manufacturing. The surface may look smoother, but it actually has more ridges and, as a result, more surface area than a rough surface. It's just rough at a microscopic level, which means it could be more surface area than a low grit sandpaper. But once again, if we want to know the answers, let's just run the experiment. I made 3 more coupons that I linearly sanded hard with 60 grit sandpaper. If the orbital sander seems to make it worse, maybe linear sanding is the key to getting back to that 4,000 Newton number. So we'll do that by pressing hard with 60 grit sandpaper. Every time I do these tests, I'm using brand new sandpaper to reduce contamination. That's important, so I'll say it again. Every time I run a new series of tests, not necessarily when I make a new coupon, I get a new piece of sandpaper to reduce contamination. This is foreshadowing, but I bet it's not in the way that you think. I kept the sanding direction mostly consistent, aiming to create deep, straight grooves, then I wiped each surface off with IPA to clean it. I then mixed up another batch of Loctite E120 HP with a bit of black dye, and vacuum degassed in the mix cup before pouring it into the mold. I was burnt out by this point, so I skipped the step of re-degassing the epoxy while it was in the mold. This is another inconsistency, and if these results perform well enough, I figured I could rerun them with more degassing. This is also more accurate to the way I'll be bonding fins onto my rockets. These fillets will be big enough that it'll be hard to degas the epoxy once it's on the surface, but all of this assumes I ever find a good solution here. So let's fast forward and break these samples. These 3 samples are all identical with consistent preparation, cleaning, epoxy, degassing, etc. And yet the only thing we are consistently doing is falling well short of that 4,000 Newton number from the early 60 grit tests. And the spread between them is wide, with 3,300, 2,900, and 1,900 Newton breakpoints. This is not good. Next, I followed some logic from my original testing, which seemed to indicate that lower grit sandpapers perform better. We've been messing around with 60 grit. Let's go lower. How about 40? The nice thing about lower grit sandpaper is it goes a lot faster. There are really big grooves that are created here, and so we etch away a lot more surface area every time we move the paper across. It might be a win-win. Maybe this is how we do big composite parts. Just as always, after sanding, I wiped the surface clean using lint-free wipes and high-grade isopropyl alcohol. Then I mixed up another batch of epoxy with a little black dye, degassed in the mix cup, poured it into the mold, then re-degassed in the mold to get as much strength as I could. I was hopeful and trying with every technique I knew to get back to that 4,000 Newton number, and when the epoxy had cured for 48 hours... Oh, wait. Sidebar, all of these tests were run 48 hours after bonding. That is a variable I controlled for. The epoxy should cure to full strength within 24 hours, but 48 gives us a little bit more margin. Okay, sidebar over. After demolding the 40 grit samples, I loaded them up and let it rip. So it's like a little better. We've got 3,000, 2,800, and 3,400, but 60 grit has outperformed these results plenty of times. I'm not really sure that we can call this better. I think I need to give this one more really good shot. We need to pull all of the stops and give these tests every opportunity to succeed and get back to that 4,000 Newton number. I'm gonna prep 3 more samples, and they're each gonna use 60 grit linear sanding until the surface is completely gray. Then I'm gonna thoroughly wipe it down with high-grade IPA on a lint-free wipe, switching the sides of the wipe periodically to not reintroduce old contaminants. I'm starting to run out of fiberglass, so 2 of these are black fiberglass and 1 is green. As previously mentioned, while this is an uncontrolled variable, I haven't been able to find any correlation between the strength and the color of the fiberglass. To explore every option of getting a stronger bond, I also shortened the time between the epoxy mixing and the bond to the surface to a single-digit number of seconds. I dispensed the epoxy directly through the mix nozzle into the mold, and then I vacuum degassed once it was in the mold. Then I left the mold for 48 hours, knowing I had given this batch every chance that I could at working. With breakpoints at 2,600, 2,250, and 3,200 newtons, we are not back. It is so f***ing over. That's an average of 2,700 with a wide deviation, and once again, it's nowhere near that 4,000 Newton peak. I'm starting to think we're trying to solve this in the wrong way, though. That maximum strength of 4,000 Newtons with 60 grit sandpaper was good, but it's clearly not replicable, at least not consistently. I must have etched it in like the perfect way, or used like the best possible batch of Loctite. Oh shoot, okay, hold on one sec. All the epoxy is from the same batch. It's all Loctite E120 HP, and although I switched to a bunch of different cartridges, I purchased a large order of this stuff at the very start and ensured that the label for the batch number on each cartridge was exactly the same. So even though the cartridges are different, the Loctite, like, batch number is exactly the same. So it's probably as close as I can get to maintaining batch consistency. Okay, sidebar over. We aren't getting back to 4,000, and if we do, I don't think it's valuable because we can't do it consistently. I'm trying everything I can at this point in the project, and I can barely get these samples to break 3,000 newtons, just 75% of our theoretical and demonstrated maximum. I mean, just by the numbers, the IPA alone, no sanding, is performing better. So, like, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Around this time, I went over to a friend's house to hang out by a fire and meet some new folks. I was complaining loudly about how I couldn't get good composite bonds, and some dude I had never met chimed in and said, "Just use acetone and IPA." Frustrated and thinking he didn't know what he was talking about, I shot back that in my experience, 60 grit sandpaper had performed better than IPA or acetone. He doubled down and said you need to acetone first, then you have to come in and clean up the residue it leaves with IPA. I told him that sounded good in theory, but I had real numbers to back up my 60 grit sandpaper. By this point, I had heard a lot of people claim that they knew the best techniques for composites without ever backing them up. And then he told me where he worked, and then I stopped talking.
Here we go.
I had accidentally fought the dude in charge of bond prep for composite structures on an orbital launch vehicle. And not just any orbital launch vehicle, but one certified for national security space launch. I won't tell you which company it is, but it's a pretty short list and an awfully hard certification to get. Specifically, I learned that when getting certified to fly national security missions, the US government was very interested in companies and assembly lines that are robust to the loss of skilled labor. And to put that in simpler terms, if the quality of your composite bonds relies on some old technician with perfect sanding technique, when they leave, can someone else do it just as good? When the government spends $50 billion on a spy satellite and puts it on a rocket, that rocket has to work regardless of who works at the company, or who quit, or who recently took their place. If your goal is reliability and consistency, it does not matter what maximum strength you can achieve. It matters what strength you can achieve every time. Acetone and IPA is how we get that. When working with 60 grit sandpaper, I was able to achieve an extremely strong bond, but I could never do it consistently. If a bond fails at 4,000 newtons one day and 1,000 newtons the next, I have to design my rocket around the 1,000 newton number, and we just have a bunch of this goofy margin above there that never gets used. So after one of the most humbling experiences of my life talking with this expert, I drove home excited to try a new bond prep method. Here's the plan. I cut out a new series of test coupons, and we're gonna run 11 tests. First, we're gonna do 4 coupons that are straight up what the expert said. No sanding, just 10 seconds of wiping with acetone and cleaning it after with IPA. I'm using regular paper towels for acetone, and the IPA is done with a lint-free wipe to reduce debris. Technically, you should do lint-free for everything, but this is a YouTube video, not a research lab. The theory here is that as the stronger solvent, acetone will eat away more of the surface contamination than IPA. It also slightly dissolves the top layer of resin in the composite, which is good in moderation. That helps open up some bond sites in both pieces, but it can also degrade the top layer of each composite, so the acetone should only be used in short durations, which is why I'm limiting that wipe to 10 seconds. If the acetone pools on top for longer than 3 to 5 seconds after wiping, you'll start to damage that top layer of resin, and this is likely the cause of some of the low results with long acetone wipes I did in earlier tests. Coming in with IPA after the acetone will further help clean up residue from dissolved oils and contaminants. Sometimes these aren't fully removed by the acetone because of how fast it evaporates, and wiping them off with a lint-free wipe and IPA will further clean the area. For these first 4, I hand mixed a batch of epoxy, degassed it in the cup, poured it into the molds, and then re-degassed the molds before letting it cure. For the next 3 coupons, I'm gonna run everything the same except for one step. We're not gonna vacuum degas in the cup, we're dispensing the epoxy through the mix nozzle directly into the mold. My hope here is that once again we'd find some extra strength by depositing the freshly mixed epoxy right onto the surface within a single-digit number of seconds. Finally, we should compare this with some sanding. So I hand sanded 4 more coupons with 60 grit sandpaper. I did this with moderate strength, linearly, mostly back and forth until the surface was gray. Then, after sanding, I cleaned that surface with acetone for about 10 seconds, then came in with IPA and wiped it off just like all the other samples. And for the epoxy, I mixed it up in a cup, degassed the cup, poured the epoxy into the mold, and then re-degassed the mold before letting it cure for 48 hours.
Relax. My aim is true. Yeah. One swing will do. Now, cuties, crush them! Here
Folks, the results are in. We're looking for consistency. Let's see if we got it. For the straight acetone and IPA wipe, we've got 3350, 3200, 3000, and 3260. Awesome, all in the same area. For the fast bonded acetone and IPA wipe, we have 3000, 3200, and 3250. Same ballpark, no huge difference in strength. So bonding immediately versus 15 minutes after mixing had no real effect. And finally, for the 60 grit sanded with an acetone and IPA wipe after, we have 3260, 3230, 3200, and 3000. Interestingly, at least for my tests, sanding did not meaningfully improve the strength, and this is great news for me considering I was getting pretty tired of doing it. The standard deviation of these coupons was lower than any other test series I ran, and that means it worked. Acetone and IPA achieved the consistency that the tech claimed it would. It seems like this is really the trick to getting repeatable bond strength, and it is remarkable how close I came to figuring this out during the earlier series of tests. In many of these runs, I was sanding and using IPA right after, but I wasn't doing acetone beforehand. Maybe the sandpaper I used had a strong enough mold release on it that the IPA couldn't get rid of it. That might explain some of the huge deviations in earlier tests. And maybe my fresh sheets of sandpaper weren't that fresh after all. If these sheets were contaminated with just a little bit of oil or grease, these results would start to make a lot more sense. This is especially true because I picked fresh sheets of sandpaper before every new test series, but not before every every test coupon. So, for example, on the 320 grit test, I used the same sandpaper between the first and second coupon. Whatever contamination was picked up by the sandpaper after the first coupon probably made it onto the second, which would explain the low result here. And there are several other examples of sandpaper reuse that have wild differences in their results. I want to run this series of tests again, but differently. Now that I can achieve a consistent bond strength, I want to go back and rerun that prep to bond time series of tests to see if we can find that curve in the data. I also want to retest different grits of sandpaper because I have a sneaking suspicion that higher grit sandpaper is actually better, but I just couldn't see it given the noise in my testing. Rocketry as a hobby is filled with people claiming they know the right way to do something, and sometimes they do. Every now and then, some anonymous engineer posts on a forum with deep knowledge about a topic, and we all become smarter because of it. But it can be hard to tell when someone knows what they're talking about versus when they're making it up. The only way to know any of this stuff for sure is to run the test yourself, and the bar is usually pretty low to get the answers you want. It has never been easier, and I mean it. Do you have an idea for what you'd do differently in this bond test series? Look at this. For $60 with some ratchet straps and a little creativity, you can do the same type of test setup that I did and run the experiment yourself. At the same time, there are tons of peer-reviewed resources online that will tell you all the things that I tell you in this video, but more detailed and more trustworthy. The value in that data is enormous, and I don't mean to downplay it, but there is no data like your data. Run the experiment. All this testing happened over a year ago in the summer of 2024. I sat on this footage for a while because I didn't have the time to put it together until now. I was also a little embarrassed at the amount of testing I went through to find out something I probably could have learned with a few more Google searches. But I gained a lot more understanding through this process, and it was certainly worthwhile. Sometimes these projects take me a long time to edit and then publish. Like right now I'm working on a payload deployment device, a new nose cone, and a couple of end motors, but those won't be out for at least a month because they're not done yet. If you want real-time update videos every 2 weeks, I post behind-the-scenes footage of all the designing, building, and testing that I do on the BPS Patreon. That is how this project is funded, and I want to give an enormous thank you to the generosity of the folks over there. Specifically for this bond testing project, it did not take a short amount of time to complete, and it was not always easy to keep going, but their generosity and support allowed that to happen. Thanks again to the folks over there who know that progress isn't always linear, and thanks to you for watching this enormous video. I'll be back soon with another one. My name is Joe Barnard. May your skies be blue and your winds be low. Goodbye.
Have a shop. Ooh, this kind of shop. This is not interesting. Ася. Это... Ты тут бухаешь. Oof. Okay, I'm going to restart this thing.
She's mine. Pretty, right? Lucia, I'll face the enemy. ending's already written. The tiger has arrived. Leave it to me. Back to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Now we have lots of HP. Relatively. $48 is the least, so that's 45 that I can spend. 15 plus 25 is 45. Okay, so exactly enough.
I got you. Reverse shockwave.
Unfortunately, that is not future or anyone. Oh.
This is your last page. Are you ready for this? The tigers are on it! Listen to my roar! I am ready. Sleep well. Yeah, the next page is the ending. Here we go. Are you ready for this?
Okay, that's the ultimate, but let's actually start it and do the correct thing.
Dream. Scary and fierce. Don't worry. When a little reward. Don't worry. One swing will do. Now, little cuties, crush them. Yeah. Here we go. Relax. My aim is true. Are you ready for this?
Come on. Like, is it valuable even? I'm not sure.
Like a shadow. Pretty, right? That's as far as you go. You will rest amidst the ice. Yeah. Here we go. Where are you going? Noise, be gone. Are you ready for this? Thanatos Surge! As foreshadowed. Why struggle? Into the frozen abyss. You asked for it. Listen to my roar! Faithful companions, hear my call! Slumber in the mist. Yeah. That's as far as you go. Rest in peace. Why struggle? Noise, be gone. Leave it to see. Yeah. Why struggle? Noise, be gone. Reaper Shockwave! That's as far as you go. Into the frozen abyss. Are you ready for this? You asked for it. The story's far. Rest in peace. Yeah. Here we go. Relax. My aim is true. Lucia, I'll face the enemy head on.
Это за ты. Don't worry, one swing will do. I'm doing something wrong. Let's actually try a bit. Alright?
Listen to my roar! Slumber in the A little reward. Don't worry, one swing will do. Faithful companions, heed my call! There! Close an opening! You asked for it. Into the frozen abyss. Watch the blind spots. Lucia, I'll face the enemy head on. That's as far as you go. Noise, be gone. Sleep well. Careful. This attack is gonna be tricky. Now, little cuties, crush them!
Come on.
Why struggle? The stories will rest in peace. I'm scary and fierce. Thanatos Star!
I haven't noticed anything.
Train begins. Hooray! Let's finish this! Slumber in the mist. That's as far as you go. But now, little cuties, crush them! Why struggle? Noise, be gone. You asked for it. The story's far into the frozen abyss. Rest amidst the ice. Listen to my roar! Thanatos! Pretty, right? Drawn from countless legends, melodies, and dreams. A little reward. My move. Are you ready for this? Slumber in the mist. Like a shadow. How about a little faster? That's as far as you go. Noise, be gone. The next page is the ending. Sleep well. Yeah. Here we go. You asked for it. Into the frozen abyss. I'm scary and fierce. The name of the night emissary. Slumber in the mist. Why struggle? Don't worry, one swing will do. Are you ready for this? That's as far as you go. Rest in peace. Now, little cuties, crush them! Woo! Yep. You asked for it. Noise, be gone. Station lightning strike! Yeah. Wanna play a game?
Sure.
A sweet dream begins. As foreshadowed. Yeah. Don't worry, one swing will do. The ending's already written. Leave this part to me. Why struggle? The story's far into the frozen abyss. A little reward. A new chapter begins. I'm scary and fierce. Faithful companions, take my call. Slumber in. Oh, my turn then. Huh? Worn out already? I smell it. The enemy's right behind us. You can trust.
What was that?
It's showtime! Are you ready for this? Why struggle? Here we are in the midst. The next page is the ending! Don't worry, one swing. I'm scary and fierce!
I'm scary and fierce.
Wanna play a game? As for Shadow. You asked for it. Into the frozen abyss. Now, little cuties, crush them! That's as far as you go.
Okay, days, sure, anomaly, sure, but that's not what I want. Oh, here we go. No me están. Let's chill. Oh. And that's all. Fucking great.
Listen to my roar! Tiger like a shadow, drawn from countless legends, melodies, and dreams. Why struggle? The story's far. Rest in peace. You asked for it. Noise, be gone. You will rest amidst the ice. That's as far as you go. Echoes into the frozen abyss. Wait, let's finish this. Faithful companions, take my call. Pretty, right?
Come on.
Bring on the fireworks! In the name of the night emissary! A little reward. The next page is the ending! Yep. Here we go. Don't worry, one swing will do. Let's cool things down. Fall back, Hargreaves, for a shockwave! Oh, my turn then. Ice is cracking. Rest in peace now, little cuties. Crush them! Woo! The story's far from
But okay.
Bombshell emails directly from Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Mac.
I'm so fucking tired.
Maxwell confirmed Donald Trump not only lied, not only knew about Epstein's underage sex trafficking of girls, but likely personally participated and spent hours, likely alone, with one of the victims. We're gonna go through and analyze the actual emails because they are gobsmacking.
I have spent the last 17 years in my own prison. Jeffrey and all the co-conspirators did to me. I was raped repeatedly. I was raped 3 times a day sometimes. And yes, Ghislaine must die in prison.
Now, Sarah Ransom wasn't Jeffrey Epstein's only victim, but she might have been the one who said it best. Because for nearly 2 decades, the story of Jeffrey Epstein has been one of power, privilege, and silence. He built a network that preyed on vulnerable and protected the powerful. Epstein is now dead, and he never had to face his accusers in court. Maxwell is in a minimum security prison without offense and is negotiating with the Justice Department for a sweetheart deal of her own. But the truth about who else was involved has never been fully told. But this week, new emails surfaced, some written before Donald Trump ran for president. These emails show Epstein and Maxwell talking about Trump and at least one victim at Epstein's house. So the question isn't just what Epstein did, it's what Donald Trump knew, when he knew it, and what he did in response. And now, most importantly, what Trump did with the victim. Now, this week, House Democrats, for the first time, have released written proof that Epstein and Maxwell discussed Donald Trump and a victim by name. Now, the first email is from 2011. In it, Epstein tells Maxwell, quote, "I want you to realize that dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Victim spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned, police chief, etc. I'm 75% there." To which Maxwell replied, quote, "I've been thinking about that." Now, these messages, written before Trump ever entered politics, suggest that there was more between them than has ever been publicly admitted. Now, let's really think about the wording here. Quote, "I want you to realize that dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Victim spent hours at my house with him." But let's break this down. Hours. They spent hours. The victim, an underage sex trafficked girl, spent hours with Trump at Epstein's house. There's only so many things that this could mean. It's not like Trump is known for his pithy conversation. And Trump's past behavior with underage girls and women in general is spotty at best. Then there's the dog that didn't bark. In context, it's clear it means that Epstein is surprised that Trump hasn't been implicated given how dirty he is. He spent hours with this one particular victim. Unless there be any doubt about how dirty Donald Trump actually is, in another released email from 2018, Epstein says, quote, "You see, I know how dirty Donald is. My guess is that non-lawyers, NY biz people have no idea what it means to have your fixer flip." And in context, when you identify these specific individuals, it implies that they spent time alone together. Epstein could have said they met at a party. Instead, he says those 2 individuals are the ones that spent hours together. And further, it appears the police chief never asked specifically about Trump. But especially in context, the email confirms that Donald Trump was so intertwined with Epstein's dealings and spent so much time with one particular underage girl that it's remarkable. Literally, they are remarking about it, that it's weird that he hasn't been implicated. Now, all this talk of compromising emails reminds me that it's probably a good time to wipe all of your personal and private information off the internet. Your cell phone number, home address, email address, private social media accounts, and tons of sensitive data are shockingly easy to purchase by anyone online. But you can fight back and take control of your private information by signing up for today's sponsor, Incogni. Because Incogni wipes your personal data from the internet by searching the internet, reaching out to data brokers and websites directly on your behalf, and forcing them to remove your private information. If they resist, Incogni will take care of that too, because Incogni fights back. But what makes Incogni truly powerful in taking back control of your privacy is the custom removals feature. It allows you to flag an unlimited number of sites where your data is exposed, and you can even have Incogni's privacy experts review and tackle the most uncooperative data brokers and Google search sites. Now, I've been using Incogni for years now, and that time you can see I've been on hundreds of lists, some of which had a high sensitivity score, meaning the broker had tons of data on me. Luckily, Incogni has completed hundreds of takedowns for me in that time, And I could never do this myself, so thank you to Incogni for weeks worth of work and adding me to over 40 suppression lists. And Incogni will continue to conduct ongoing removals, because even if the broker removes your data once, they can always collect it and then publish it again. Now, helpfully in this context, the Republicans released unredacted versions of this particular email. And that email revealed that the victim mentioned is Virginia, presumably Virginia Giuffre. And that makes perfect sense. At the time, 2010 to 2011, Epstein was settling many lawsuits with his victims. And this might be a reference to the fact that Trump hadn't been sued by any of those victims, but more likely it was a reference to the fact that Trump hadn't been mentioned in the first reporting on Virginia Giuffre's victimization by Prince Andrew. Giuffre's story was first published in March 2021 by The Mail on Sunday. That coverage first published the now infamous photo showing Prince Andrew with his arm around her at Maxwell's house in Belgravia, London. And soon after, Giuffre went public with allegations against Epstein and Prince Andrew, including a Vanity Fair expose in July of 2011. So you have the facts of what happened to Virginia Giuffre finally becoming public in March of 2011. Then, a few days later, Epstein, seemingly out of nowhere in an email with no subject line, says, quote, "I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump." In other words, crazy how this incredibly dirty guy, my best friend Donald Trump, isn't mentioned in the reporting. Because, you know, Virginia spent hours at my house with him. Now, others have speculated that this is a reference to Epstein thinking that Trump was a cooperating witness, and that's what Epstein was 75% there on. I think that's unlikely given the context of what was going on in the world. It's probably just that Giuffre's horrible experience was becoming public, and Epstein was just surprised that Trump wasn't mentioned in it, given his extensive involvement. And this fits with the fact that Giuffre herself never publicly accused Trump of illegality. Now, the police chief here likely refers to Palm Beach Chief of Police Michael Ryder, and as we have mentioned previously, we think that Ryder is, from the public record, one of the only good guys in the story. In 2005, after a parent reported that her 14-year-old daughter had been paid to give Epstein a massage, Ryder launched an investigation that uncovered dozens of victims and extensive evidence, including trash pulls, witness interviews, and surveillance. And then when the local state attorney Barry Kreischer appeared too lenient on Epstein, Ryder turned the case over to the FBI in 2006. But back to the emails, thinking like a litigator, the context is also damning. This email was written in 2011. It wasn't public spin, and it wasn't written with politics in mind. This was a private conversation between Epstein and Maxwell years after Epstein got a sweetheart deal from prosecutors in Florida and years before Trump ran for president. Both of them thought that they were probably legally in the clear. And these are just two pals talking about criming in the privacy of their own emails and how their friend Donald Trump was involved. That also fits with past history. For example, in 2002, Trump said that his pal Epstein is, quote, "a lot of fun to be with. He likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." But when he aspired to become the president, Trump kept claiming that he ended his friendship with Epstein, sometimes claiming because Epstein assaulted a girl at Mar-a-Lago, and most recently because Epstein stole a Mar-a-Lago employee for himself. But these newly released private emails and the story surrounding them tell a different story. To understand why all this matters, we have to go back to Palm Beach in the early 2000s, when Jeffrey Epstein first caught the attention of law enforcement. The allegations against Maxwell and Epstein were horrifying. Underage victims said Maxwell gained their trust, transported them to Epstein properties around the world, and then groomed them to participate in sex acts with Epstein and powerful, wealthy men. As Liz Dye explained on this channel, Epstein had hundreds of millions of dollars, but no one was quite sure how he earned this money. Epstein had a philanthropic organization that he used to amass goodwill and connections with prominent people and institutions around the world. He owned a private island, multiple luxury homes, and 2 private jets. And his nonprofit was later revealed to be a tool for image management and tax avoidance, especially after his 2005 arrest in Florida for sexually abusing underage girls. One accuser told the Miami Herald that Epstein was preying on 14-year-old girls who were basically homeless. Another victim said he tried to rape her, and victims said that Maxwell acted as his pimp, getting close to vulnerable girls, even preying on them at summer camp, and then introducing them to Epstein. Despite credible accusations from dozens of survivors, Epstein was able to plead guilty in 2008 to soliciting a minor for prostitution instead of serial sex abuse of minors. And Epstein's legal team included famous Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz and former special counsel Ken Starr. And a non-prosecution agreement brokered between Epstein's lawyers and then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta has been called a sweetheart deal that let a serial child predator get away with a slap on the wrist. Now, what does this have to do with Donald Trump? Well, plenty. Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump used to socialize with each other between the 1990s and the early 2000s. In 2002, Trump said, quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side, no doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life." Now, it appears Epstein was once a member of Mar-a-Lago, but at some point the two had a falling out. According to court documents filed by some of Epstein's accusers, Epstein was banned from the property for assaulting an underage girl. Now, bizarrely, Trump has never verified that assertion. And victim Virginia Giuffre said that she was working as a spa attendant at Mar-a-Lago in 2000 when she was approached by Maxwell about giving Epstein massages. Now, notably, Giuffre has never implicated Trump. However, others did. In early November 2016, a woman who went by the pseudonym Katie Johnson sued Trump, alleging that he raped her at an Epstein house party in 1994 when she was 13 years old. Now, Trump has always denied those allegations, and Johnson dropped the case after receiving death threats. But Trump has floated 3 different stories about how his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein ended. The first is that he saw Epstein behaving inappropriately toward a girl at the club and kicked him out. The second is that Epstein competed with him on a real estate deal, and that ended their friendship. And then this summer, Trump had a news story. Epstein poached a girl on his staff from the Mar-a-Lago spa, and that soured their friendship. Stole as if she were Trump's property.
I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people, yeah. He stole her. And by the way, she had no complaints about us.
Now, if that's true, that could be another reference to Virginia Giuffre, and some have pointed to the fact that Giuffre never implicated Trump as an exoneration of Trump. But that's contradicted by the fact that in 2011, when Giuffre's story was first coming out, Epstein found it so remarkable that while people were talking about Giuffre, Trump hadn't been mentioned at that point. But it also seems strange for Donald Trump, who at that point was a legitimate TV star and a putative self-reported billionaire, ostensibly running several businesses, to have been intimately aware of these staffing challenges faced at the Mar-a-Lago spa. But apparently, he was.
I have a great spa, one of the best spas in the world at Mar-a-Lago. And people were taken out of the spa, hired by him.
Now, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir was released last month, and in the book, Giuffre said she never witnessed Trump abusing anyone. But Giuffre was just one of the hundreds of Epstein's victims. To date, the Epstein estate has paid more than $171 million to over 150 women. And the scale of the trafficking was enormous. Now, knowing all that, and knowing that people are suspicious about Trump's connections to Epstein, you might think that Trump would go out of his way not to link himself to the world's most notorious living sex trafficker. But you'd be wrong, because Trump can't seem to bring himself to condemn Ghislaine Maxwell.
I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well, whatever it is. I don't know the situation with Prince Andrew.
Now, he said that after Maxwell was arrested for sex trafficking minors. And as we talked about back in July, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump contributed a lewd drawing to a book celebrating Epstein's 50th birthday. And his response was to send his personal lawyer and now second in command of the Department of Justice, Todd Blanche, to interview Ghislaine Maxwell in prison. And during that meeting, Maxwell denied her crimes, blamed the victims, and described Trump as a perfect gentleman. And at the time, Maxwell was housed at FCI Tallahassee, a low-security prison. But soon after Blanche's visit, she was transferred to FPC Bryan, a minimum security camp with no perimeter fence, a level where sex offenders are rarely placed without special approval. And that raises an obvious question. Was the interview a quid pro quo? As in, Maxwell clears Trump and someone clears her transfer. And will President Trump pardon or commute her sentence? We just don't know. There are rumors that he's contemplating at least commuting her sentence. But that's not the only potential sweetheart deal in this whole affair. Because despite all the evidence gathered by the police and FBI, in 2008, U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who had been appointed by George W. Bush, effectively let Epstein off the hook. He negotiated a secret non-prosecution agreement in 2008 that protected Epstein and his alleged co-conspirators. Acosta's office had identified 36 underage victims and drafted a 53-page indictment, but Epstein secured what the Miami Herald later called the deal of a lifetime. Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state prosecution charges and served just 13 months in county jail with daily work release. Investigators said the evidence showed Epstein hosted underage sex parties for affluent men. However, the agreement also granted immunity to any unnamed potential co-conspirators. Now, a federal judge later found the deal was illegal because Acosta did not consult the victims before agreeing to it. And to be clear, deals like this basically don't happen. Federal prosecutors just don't hand out blanket non-prosecution agreements in child sex trafficking cases, let alone ones that purport to protect unnamed third parties. Lawyers who reviewed the deal said they had never seen anything like it. But even more baffling, when Trump was elected president in 2016, he appointed Acosta as Secretary of the Department of Labor. Now, we don't know if there were prior ties between Trump and Acosta, but we do know that when Acosta proposed as Trump's Secretary of Labor an 80% budget cut to the International Labor Affairs Bureau, the division that funds programs to combat child and human trafficking and forced labor, Congress was outraged, and that contributed to Acosta's eventual demise. Because when the Miami Herald story broke, Acosta resigned. And at the time, Trump was worried about Acosta, quote,
I feel very badly actually for Secretary Acosta because I've known him as being somebody that works so hard and has done such a good job. I feel very badly about that whole situation.
Now, in litigation, the best way to find out that someone is lying is that their testimony contradicts the written documentary evidence, especially emails and texts. And this 2011 email makes it obvious that Ghislaine Maxwell lied to Todd Blanche when he visited her in prison. What she told Blanche was exactly what now President Trump would want to hear. She claimed that she only saw Trump and Epstein together in public, never in private.
I believe I only ever saw them in social settings. I don't recall any private settings.
And at that point, Blanche jumps in to help her emphasize the settings were social.
Did you ever observe, you said that I mean, have you seen there's photographs, public photographs of Mr. Epstein and President Trump together?
Yes.
And there's photographs of, I think you're in some of the photographs as well. Those all appear to be social settings.
Yes.
Maxwell then said she had never seen Trump in Epstein's house.
That's my memory. There were social settings. I don't know Epstein's, if he had, whatever the nature of the president's friendship, if you will, or however you want to define that with Epstein, I was never witnessed. I think they were friendly, like people are in social settings. I don't think they were close friends, or I certainly never witnessed the president in any of, I don't recall ever seeing him in his house, for instance.
In other words, Maxwell's story, concocted at a time when she had the absolute most to gain from telling Blanche exactly what he wanted to hear, is directly contradicted by Epstein himself in 2011. And we don't know if these emails were in the volumes of files that the DOJ turned up during its investigation of Maxwell and Epstein, but it underscores why it was so preposterous for Blanche to interview Maxwell to begin with. Apart from how blatantly corrupt the whole thing is, he didn't even have familiarity with a complete trial record. If a prosecutor or FBI agent who was involved in the prosecution had been in that interview, they might have been able to flag it as a lie. But it really seems like Blanche was not down there looking for inconsistencies. He was there to get his boss out of trouble. And of course, Maxwell also denied ever hearing Epstein say that Trump had done anything inappropriate.
And did you ever hear Mr. Epstein or anybody say that President Trump had done anything inappropriate with masseuses or with anybody in your world?
Absolutely never. In any context.
And again, that is now rebutted by the 2011 email, which featured Epstein claiming that Trump participated in an act against a victim at his house. But wait, there's so much more. The other two emails that were in the first tranche of documents that were released included correspondence between Epstein and Trump presidential biographer Michael Wolff. This exchange began on December 15th, 2015, the night of a debate in the Republican presidential primary. And Wolff told Epstein that CNN was, quote, planning to ask Trump tonight about his relationship with you, either on air or in scrum afterwards. Epstein wrote back, if we were able to craft an answer for him, what do you think it should be? And Wolff, going way outside the bounds of ethical reporting, told him not to say anything. Yet, quote, I think you should let him hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the house, then that gives you a valuable PR and political currency that could be used to hang him later or save him generating a debt. So there you have an insinuation that Epstein was or was capable of blackmailing the 2016 Republican nominee for president. Though CNN never asked Trump a direct question about Epstein that night. House Democrats also released another email from January of 2019 when Trump was running for re-election. Epstein wrote, quote, victim, Mar-a-Lago, redacted. Trump said he asked me to resign, never a member ever. Of course, he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop, which is another admission from Epstein that Trump, at the very least, knew about all of the sex trafficking and prostitution. Now, some will say this email exonerates Trump since Epstein explicitly says that Trump asked Ghislaine to stop, but it's also possible that the only reason Trump asked for things to stop, if indeed he did make that request, was because it became a political liability for him at that point. And then there's even more evidence of shoddy reporting. You might recall reporter Landon Thomas Jr., who wrote the 2002 New York Magazine article where Trump praised Epstein. Well, we now have some of the emails between Landon and Epstein. These emails were exchanged 13 years after Landon Thomas Jr. broke the story. It was 2015, Trump was running for office for the first time, and in 2015, Landon wrote to tell Epstein that people were now asking him for juicy details about Trump. To which Epstein responded, quote, would you like photos of Donald and girls in bikinis in my kitchen? And when Landon said yes, Epstein sent back the name of a Hawaiian tropic girl and 2 other items which have been redacted. Landon then asked Epstein why he didn't put this information out there for the good of the country, and Epstein replied with a link to an article, and he said, quote, my 20-year-old girlfriend in '93 that after 2 years I gave to Donald. And Epstein goes on to say, read my airplane logs in Hawaiian tropic contest, have them ask my houseman about Donald almost walking through the door, leaving his nose print on the glass as young women were swimming in the pool.
go.
So this is all probably going to get worse before it gets better. We can be certain that more information will come out now that the House Oversight Committee released an additional 20,000 pages of documents it obtained from the Epstein estate. Landon worked for the New York Times and many other media outlets at the time, and he had all this information directly from Epstein, and yet he sat on it for all of this time. And it's also come to light that Landon, the reporter who was tipping off Epstein and who Epstein offered to give photos to, was fired from the New York Times for soliciting money from Epstein. It's also unclear exactly when Trump and Epstein had a falling out, but there is a 2017 email in which a person, possibly a victim we don't know, is at Epstein's house trying to get in and says, quote, "I don't want to come early and find Trump in your house." Now, I don't want to read too much into that. That's 2017, after Trump is already president. That one very well could be a joke, but we don't know exactly when Trump and Epstein had a falling out. And we don't have time now, but there are also extensive emails between Steve Bannon and Epstein in 2018. 2018! So the big question now is, did Trump commit a crime against an adult or minor based on the Epstein emails? Now, we don't know yet, but consider these aren't even the Epstein documents that Republicans want to keep from becoming public. There's likely more, including the rumored pictures of Trump with underage victims. And bizarrely, the White House has been meeting with Congress people to try to kill the discharge petition related to the releasing of the rest of the files, which could be seen as part of an ongoing criminal cover-up. And certainly these suspicious interactions and preferential treatment between the DOJ and Ghislaine Maxwell look worse by the minute. So you can bet that there will be more.
Whatever. It's still fucking inconclusive. And that's quite a night.
If ever you find that the animals in Nodcry behave in ways you do not understand, just ask me and I will explain.
Inside the Democratic Party, in its back rooms and its group chats and its conferences and its
this is how Democrats win.
online flame wars, an increasingly bitter debate has taken hold over what the party needs to do to become capable of beating back Trumpism. Do Democrats need to become more populist, more moderate, more socialist? Do they need to embrace the abundance agenda? Do they need to produce more vertical video? The answer is yes, they do. All of them, but none of them in particular. The Democratic Party does not need to choose to be one thing. It needs to choose to be more things. In a few days, there will be elections for mayor of New York City, for governor of New Jersey, and for governor of Virginia. As of now, Democrats are leading in all these races. These aren't unusual leads in what have become reliably Democratic states. You can imagine a world where the violence and corruption of Donald Trump's first 9 months in office
You're gambling with World War III.
had led to a collapse in support for him and his party. We'll see what Election Day actually brings, but we do not look to be in that world. That's all the more true if you look a year out to the midterms. Democrats are leading by about 2.5 points. At about this time in 2017, Democrats were up by about 10 points. Democrats have another problem. They're going to need to overcome the chain of redistricting Republicans are setting off across the country.
There may be more of a pad here for Republicans.
And the Senate is even harder for Democrats. They will need to flip 4 seats in the 2026 midterms to win back the Senate. That'd mean winning in Maine and North Carolina, no easy task, and then winning at least 2 seats in states that Donald Trump won by 10 points or more. The map for Democrats wasn't always this daunting. Go back to 2010, and 10 of those states had Democratic senators. Today, none of them do. Most of those states seem barely in reach for Democrats. There's no arguing with this fact. The number of places in which Democratic Party is competitive has shrunk. In American politics, power is not decided by a popular vote. In the Electoral College, in the House of Representatives, and particularly in the Senate, it is apportioned by place. This is the problem for Democrats. They don't just need to win more people. They need to win more places. And that requires a different kind of thinking. If Zoran Mamdani wins the New York City mayor's race, and Rob Sand wins the Iowa governor's race next year.
The Democratic and Republican parties don't solve enough problems to deserve their little shared monopoly.
Did the Democratic Party just move left or right? Neither. It got bigger. It found a way to represent more kinds of people in more kinds of places. That is a spirit it needs to embrace. Not moderation, not progressivism, but in the classic political sense of the term, representation. In 1962, Bernard Crick published this strange little book called In Defense of Politics. Politics for Crick is something precious and specific. It, quote, arises from accepting the fact of the simultaneous existence of different groups, hence different interests and different traditions, within a territorial unit under common rule. I know that's a mouthful, but that fact of difference he is pointing out, the reality of difference, is not always accepted. There are other forms of social order, like tyranny or oligarchy, that actively suppress it. But to practice politics, as Crick defines it, is to accept the reality of difference. That is to say, it is to accept the reality of other people, of how different other people are from you. Politics involves genuine relationships with people who are genuinely other people, not tasks set for our redemption or objects for our philanthropy. Genuine relationships with people who are genuinely other people. I love that line, because the endless fantasy in politics is persuasion without representation. You elect us to represent you, and where we disagree, we will explain to you why you are wrong. The result of that politics tends to be neither persuasion nor representation. People know when you're not listening to them, and they know how to respond. They stop listening to you. They vote for people who they feel do listen to them. I'm not a pessimist on the possibility of persuasion, but I believe it is rare, maybe impossible, outside a context of mutual respect. And if I were to say where the Democratic Party went most wrong over the last decade, it's there. In too many places, Democrats sought persuasion without representation. And so they got.
Bloom increased. Yes. So the classic Bloom team. And here is the except of course what I need is I know and then F.
Neither. I've spent much of the last year talking to the kinds of voters Democrats lament losing. I feel I end up having the same conversation over and over again. They sometimes tell me about issues where the Democratic Party departed from them, but they first describe a more fundamental feeling of alienation. The Democratic Party, they came to believe, doesn't like them. Many of these people voted for Democrats until a few years ago. They didn't feel their fundamental beliefs had changed, but they began to feel like deplorables. They began to feel unwanted.
250 million people are not garbage. I can tell you who the real garbage is, but we won't say that.
When I'd push on the experiences they had, when I would ask which Democrats were they talking about, what exactly had happened, I often found they were reacting to a cultural vibe, as much or more than a flesh and blood party. They had felt something change, And I knew they were right, because something had changed. It had changed on the left, it had changed on the right, but it was diffuse. It wasn't any one person or any one moment or any one policy. The structure of American life changed in a way that has made the genuine relationships of politics much harder to maintain. I believe the first party that figures out its way out of this trap will be the one able to build a majority in this era. When I grew up in a Republican county an hour south of Los Angeles, my family subscribed to the Los Angeles Times, and to the extent I heard political commentary, it was on local radio.
2005 was a tough year for California state and local taxes are.
Good afternoon, Senator McClintock. Good afternoon, Senator Steinberg.
Now, the New York Times is the largest newspaper by subscribers in California. And a young, politically inclined kid like I was will listen to podcasts like...
Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor. On today's show, we'll talk about Donald Trump's latest musings about doing away with the Constitution to become president for life.
Trump. President Trump. Trump. Talk me through your evolution on Trump. Sure. That kid's political sensibility will be less distinctly Californian and more relentlessly national. For decades, we have been losing local media and migrating to national media. And that has meant politics everywhere is losing its local character and reflecting national divisions. Then there is the astonishing amount of money politicians need and the places they go to find it. In the 1970s, the Supreme Court decided money was speech.
The expenditure limitations are violative of First Amendment guarantees, and they are unconstitutional.
Campaigns became more expensive, and candidates often need a whole lot more money than what they can raise in their own states and districts. That means exciting donors who are much further to the left or right than the public, and winning over interest groups that seek their support on policy. Money can polarize, money can corrupt, but either way, it pulls candidates away from their own constituents. That was all true when I moved to Washington to cover politics in 2005. But then something else changed.
Well, what we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen.
800 million Facebook users are coming to grips with change this week.
It features scrolling news feeds and snazzier pictures.
By showing you older tweets it thinks you care about right on top of your current feed.
We're not going to touch the phones.
All right. Can't touch it no matter what happens.
It's a serious problem, Tom.
It really is.
How much time do you spend doing this? The average smartphone user scrolls the equivalent of 78 miles a year. That's 3 marathons.
We all know this changed politics, but for all the words that have been spilled on it, I think we still miss how fundamentally it has altered the day-to-day work of politics. Since the 2024 election, there's been a lot of talk on the Democratic side about the power of the so-called groups.
There are interest groups. There are a lot of advocacy groups, a lot of parts of the Democratic Party that really thought things were fine.
They're more extreme than many of their constituents.
The progressive advocacy organizations and nonprofits that have arguably pushed Democrats to the left. I've used that term before. I've talked about the groups, but I think it is imprecise. The real thing we're talking about here is what might be called the professional political classes. The people in the groups are the same people who staff or drive all the other parts of progressive politics. One year you're with a nonprofit, then you're on a campaign, then you're in the White House, then you're back at a group. You're followed on X or Blue Sky by left-leaning journalists like me, by producers at MSNBC, or by breaking news reporters at Politico. It's not a bunch of groups. It's a professional community that exists largely online. And so that professional community's culture and its attention is governed not by its own values or goals, but by the decisions of the corporations and oligarchs who own the social media platforms, who design them to further their own profits or their own politics. The conversations pulsing across these platforms are shaped not by civic values, but by the hacks that keep people scrolling. Nuanced opinions get compressed into viral slogans. Attention collects around the loudest and most controversial voices, and the algorithms, they love conflict and inspiration and outrage and anger. Everything is always turned up to 11. Social media has thrown everyone involved at every level of politics, in every place, into the same algorithmic thunderdome. It collapsed distance and profession and time because no matter where we are or when we are, we can always be online together. We always know what our most online peers are thinking. They come to set the culture of their respective political classes, and there's nothing that most of us fear, like being out of step with our peers. This has affected the Democratic and Republican parties in different ways. Let me start with the Democrats. From 2012 to 2024, Democrats moved sharply left on virtually every issue. They often did so believing they were finally representing communities that had long suffered from too little representation. This was what they were told by the online voices and by the professional groups that claimed to represent those communities. But it went wrong. Democrats became more uncompromising on immigration and lost support among Hispanic voters. They moved left on guns and student loans and climate and lost ground with young voters. They moved left on race and lost ground with black voters. They moved left on education and lost ground with Asian American voters. They moved left on economics and lost ground with working class voters. The only major group where Democrats saw improvement across that whole 12-year period was college-educated white voters. If you judged Democratic politics expressively by what it was saying, it stood in solidarity with the struggling and the marginalized as never before. If you judged it consequentially, it was breaking faith with those it had vowed to represent and protect. Online politics is expressive. You need to say what will win favor with the highly online voices that dominate your side of the algorithm. Offline, you need to win elections.
I sued EPA, and I'll take dead aim at the cap and trade bill because it's bad for West Virginia.
Yes, that was Manchin shooting the cap and trade bill the Democrats have been trying to pass with a rifle. But Manchin, 12 years later, was the key vote to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the single largest green energy investment in American history.
This is a great day because this is a balanced bill.
Expressively, to progressives, Manchin was just a constant irritant. Consequentially, he was the Democrats' most remarkable overperformer. He made their majority possible by winning elections no Democrat should have been able to win.
In a state that the president in the previous election won by 42 points, the opposite party wins. Never happened. Never happened.
The most important question the party needed to be asking in that era was, where do they find more Joe Manchins? How do they make more Joe Manchins possible? But today's Democratic Party, particularly its online culture, has taken forms of disagreement and difference it once held inside its tent and pushed them outside.
West Virginia's most prominent Democrat changed his registration to independent today.
There are fewer and fewer people like you in the Senate. I mean, is that...
Well, my colleagues would say, thank God.
Yes, they would, including some in your former party.
Oh, many in my former party.
In 2010, when the Affordable Care Act passed, the crucial vote in the Senate came from Ben Nelson, a pro-life Democrat.
After winning fresh concessions to limit the availability of abortions.
But I would have not voted for this bill and would not vote for this bill without those provisions.
There were then roughly 40 pro-life Democrats serving in the House. Crafting compromises across these disagreements was hard. But Democrats were able to pass Obamacare, which expanded reproductive health coverage and remains the greatest Democratic policy accomplishment of the 21st century.
We are done.
That same Democratic Party, with all of its internal disagreements, it had the votes to confirm Supreme Court justices who would, and did, in their time, protect Roe.
Adorn my night!
I've been in a debate recently about whether Democrats should run pro-life candidates in red states in much the way that Republicans run pro-choice candidates like Susan Collins and Larry Hogan in blue states. And I think I was taken aback to hear people say in response to this argument that I just wanted to throw reproductive rights overboard. So I want to say this clearly. No, I don't. I thought past episodes I've done on abortion, episodes I've done in the context of what my own family has been through, should have shown that. But what I want is a Democratic Party big enough and strong enough to protect reproductive rights. And I feel our politics on this have failed, because they have failed. We cannot protect or restore reproductive freedom if the coalition that cares about that cannot compete in more places. But this point is not about any one issue. It's about a broader approach to politics. Different places have different politics, and to win in them, politicians have to represent the people who live in them. That means representing views Democrats now find to be anathema on immigration or guns or trade or climate or trans rights. But one worry I have about Democrats right now is that they do not want to confront how much of the country truly, deeply disagrees with them. Polls show that the percentage of voters saying the Democratic Party is too liberal increased sharply between 2012 and 2024. The percentage of voters saying the Republican Party is too conservative fell during that same period. Even now, after the aggression and the outrages and the violations of Trump's second administration, that gap has not fully closed. I would like to believe that all Democrats need to do to win back these voters is embrace an agenda I'm already comfortable with. Economic populism or abundance or both. But I don't think it's true. A study by the Center for Working Class Politics found that in key Rust Belt states, when you attached the Democratic label to a candidate running on an economic populist platform, that candidate lost 11 to 16 points in support. That's how Sherrod Brown, once one of the strongest economic populists in the party, lost his Ohio Senate seat to a Republican car dealer who had to settle more than a dozen lawsuits for wage theft. Jared Golden is a Democrat from Maine. In 2024, he edged out a victory in a district Donald Trump won by nearly 10 points.
Working with Republicans to secure the border and standing with law enforcement against defunding the police. I'm Jared Golden, and I approve this message because you deserve a congressman as independent as you.
No other Democrat in Congress, not one, has survived in such a pro-Trump district.
He is declaring victory, admitting it was his toughest election yet.
Now, in what strikes me as an absolutely insane turn of events, Golden is facing a primary challenge.
Golden even said he was okay with Donald Trump becoming president again.
Instead of learning from Democrats like Golden, Democrats who are successfully representing voters who are otherwise moving towards Donald Trump, some progressives want to purge him.
Because we can do better than bad and worse.
I don't think the Democratic Party should just move right. It is good, in my view, that AOC and Zoran Mamdani run as Democrats, and that Bernie Sanders has become a leader in the Democratic Party. It is good that you can be an out-and-out Democratic socialist in today's Democratic Party. But what happened over the past 15 years is the Democratic Party made room on its left and closed down on its right. For all the talk of what the press learned from Sanders and Mamdani, and it should learn things from Sanders and Mamdani, there should be at least as much talk of what they should learn from Joe Manchin or Jared Golden or Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez.
People are valid in their anger, and it is a fool's errand to try to talk somebody out of their feelings. That's not a good idea. But you also can affirm the validity of their feelings and also present a productive strategy for resolving some of those, the drivers of that anger or that fear.
Or Sarah McBride.
You can't foster social change if you don't have a conversation. You can't change people if you exclude them. And I will just say, you can't have absolutism on the left or the right without authoritarianism. Right? The fact that we have real disagreements, the fact that we have difficult conversations, the fact that we have painful conversations is not a bug of democracy, it's a feature of democracy. And yes, that is hard and difficult, but again, how can we expect that the process of overcoming marginalization is going to be fair?
The Democratic Party should be seeking more, not less, internal disagreement. It should treat that disagreement as more welcome. It should be looking for a gut-level affinity with more of this country. Moderating on this or that issue is more straightforward than finding ways to radiate respect and interest in people who disagree with you and people you've come to feel far away from. It is the building of genuine relationships in politics, not the taking of positions, that is truly hard. But that's also the part that is beautiful. It's a privilege to do that work, not a concession. We are more able to admit complexity and extend generosity when we see others as part of our community. Working to widen that circle of empathy, to widen our circle of belonging, is both morally and politically good. Whatever the problems are on the left, there is something truly frightening brewing on the right.
Putting aside the tribal interest for the corporate interest, that's absolutely the case. And that's the only way the country's going to stay together.
Exactly.
And
That's my concern.
And I absolutely agree with you. I would say, though, that the main challenge to that, the big challenge to that, is organized Jewry in America.
Paul Ingrassia, President Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Office of Special Counsel, not a small job, said on a text thread leaked to Politico that he had a, quote, Nazi streak. A separate text thread of young Republican leaders leaked to Politico had messages about sending enemies to the gas chambers, and one saying, quote, I love Hitler. Ingrassia had to withdraw his nomination, but Vice President J.D. Vance has dismissed coverage of the young Republicans' messages as pearl clutching.
And I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a stupid joke, telling a very offensive stupid joke, is cause to ruin their lives.
Look, I don't want to ruin anybody's life either, but these were recent statements by adults who are vying for leadership in political organizations with official ties to the Republican Party. There is no rule of civic generosity or political practice that Trumpism has not broken. And for many I know on the left, it's created a sense that there is no sense in trying to appeal to the median voter. No sense in moderation. No sense in any of the old rules of politics. Look at how extreme the right has become. Yet they've thrived. In this telling, Trump understands what the Democrats don't. Nothing matters anymore except attention. But a few things are wrong with that. Trump did moderate the Republican Party in crucial areas: Medicare, Social Security, trade. And the simple truth is, Democrats can't win the way Trump and the Republicans do. Trump and the Republicans lead a coalition built on overwhelming strength in rural counties. America's place-based politics gives rural places disproportionate political power. Trump and the Republicans can hold power with a smaller coalition than Democrats can. And then there's this. Democrats shouldn't want to win the way Republicans do. This country could break. The abyss is dark and it is deep, and America, like other countries, has fallen into it before and can again. I see the simple fact of a free and fair politics as much more of an achievement, something much more precious and difficult to preserve. I no longer take it or the habits of citizenship or politics that preserve it for granted. We cannot trust that providence or some innate American exceptionalism protects us from calamity. It doesn't. Over the past year, I've found myself obsessively reading histories of liberalism, looking for something, even though I didn't know exactly what. Illiberalism is winning right now. But there's nothing unusual about that. By modern standards, virtually every past society was illiberal. That we now call them illiberal. That exclusion and domination and state suppression have been made strange enough to demand a label. That is the unlikely achievement. But how did liberalism do it? For most of my life, when I called myself a liberal, I meant basically someone who believed in universal health care and the right to form a union and racial equality and social security. But in its oldest forms, liberalism was built on a virtue that we rarely talk about today. To the ancient Romans, being free required more than a republican constitution. It also required citizens who practiced liberalitas, which referred to a noble and generous way of thinking and acting to towards one's fellow citizens. The word liberalitas became liberality. Liberality proposed, it demanded a different way of relating across disagreement and division. It flowered into religious tolerance when that idea was truly radical. It built towards liberalism's great insight, liberalism's first idea. Conflict of interests and beliefs was, to the liberal mind, inescapable. If tamed and turned to competition in a stable political order, conflict could nevertheless bear fruit as argument, experiment, and exchange. Today, finding ways to turn our disagreements into exchange, into something fruitful rather than something destructive, seems almost fanciful. I saw a poll a few weeks ago that struck me. It asked Americans what they thought the top problem facing the country was. Number one was the economy. That was what I expected. But number two wasn't immigration or inflation or democracy or even Donald Trump. It was political division. In that same poll, 64% of the country said they think we're too divided to solve our problems anymore. They're not wrong. Right now, the project of America feels to many impossible. And not just on the left. I hear it every time J.D. Vance or Stephen Miller speaks. I hear it when Trump says,
I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry.
When I hear that, I hear something scary, but I also hear an opening, an opportunity. I keep coming back to something Crick writes. The moral consensus of a free state is not something mysteriously prior to or above politics. It is the activity, the civilizing activity of politics itself. Something to be valued almost as a pearl beyond price. In America, for all our sins, our injustice, our oppression, a freer state emerged through the practice of politics. It did not do so painlessly, it did not do so bloodlessly, but it did happen. And for a time, it gave us confidence in ourselves and in our system. It showed what could emerge from genuine relationships between people who are genuinely other people. And I think it still could again.
You'd think with paladins being divine casters and all, that a paladin must therefore have a deity from which their powers derive. You'd think. But paladins in later editions don't get their powers from a deity like a cleric, but from their sheer commitment to an oath. It's belief itself, not the intervention of a third party, that bends the weave to their will. It's very Planescape Torment, if you think about it. And what better illustration of this than Minthara from Baldur's Gate 3? She was once a typical drow faithful of Lolth from Menzoberranzan who was forcibly converted against her will to the Absolute when Orin the Red put a tadpole in her eye. When she breaks free of the Absolute's mind control, she finds herself with a new perspective on divinity. She's lost faith in Lolth, who she realizes is the same kind of grasping manipulator. And she'll even comment to Gale that she thinks Mystra 2 is no different. So, as a companion, Minthara is basically an atheist, or anti-theist, who scorns the divine on principle. And yet she's still a spellcasting paladin, because her divine magic didn't come from Lolth or the Absolute. It comes from her unsettlingly intense commitment to revenge as an ideal. You'd think with paladins being divine casters and all, that a paladin must therefore have a deity from which their powers derive.
Very cool. She's the smartest lol fight. In fact, she's a former lol fight. This one. The Worm Tier List by Tirzo. No.
The humble worm may be one of the most overlooked characters in the entire game. Though they may seem powerless and pathetic, in reality the worm faction has access to some of the rarest, most extraordinary special abilities in the game, and can be a nightmare to play against. But which worm builds are dominating the meta, and which are just bait? Find out in the worm tier list. But before we dive into the rankings, what even is a worm? Even though they're the most numerous creatures in the game, technically there's no such thing as a single, all-encompassing worm faction. Worm builds are actually part of several different, distantly related factions, but there are many similarities they share. All worms have long, tube-shaped character models with minimal or non-existent appendages, enabling them to weave in and out of tight spaces easily. Simple as it may be, this has proven to be one of the most reliable body plans in the history of the game, as worms have been in the game since pretty much patch 1.0. As far as base stats go, worms are not particularly stacked. Now, credit where it's due, because of their excellent regenerative perks and uniquely advanced burrowing abilities, they do score pretty high in both vitality and stealth. And there are exceptions that score high in other stats as well. But in general, they have below average base stats in almost every skill. With simple brains, no weapons, no armor, and no legs, the average worm is pretty lacking in their intelligence, power, defense, and mobility stats. The exceptions are where it gets interesting though, so without further ado, let's dig into the tier list. First in F tier, the Ice Worm. This build takes the burrowing capabilities of the worm in an unconventional direction, and opts to dig through glaciers rather than solid earth. This is a pretty unique gimmick as it grants them completely uncontested access to glacial algae as a food source. But unfortunately, it seems like unlocking the ability to burrow through ice must have cost all their evolution points, because the Ice Worm has some pretty glaring flaws in its strategy. First, the Ice Worm's stealth stat is abysmal. Its jet black appearance offers zero camouflage against the icy white surroundings, making them extremely easy for birds to spot from above and pick off. A few extra points into snow camouflage would go a long way here. And the second flaw, ice worms ironically have almost zero freezing resistance or heat resistance. They die immediately if temperatures drop below freezing, and melt if temperatures rise to even a few degrees above freezing. Luckily, due to a quirk of the game's physics engine, the temperature of glacial ice is fairly stable at their exact Goldilocks zone. But as we've seen lately, relying on glaciers as a stable habitat is quite the gamble. It wouldn't take too much to make this build completely broken, but for now, it's the lowest ranked worm on this list. Also in F tier, we have the Earthworm. Yes, it's true, the archetypal worm everyone knows and loves is a low tier. Earthworms have terrible stats. It has no offensive moves, no armor, and isn't quick enough to rely on speed to escape attacks. What's worse, even the one special ability Earthworms are believed to have is a bit overrated. Earthworms, like most worms, can regenerate from damage and potentially even survive grievous wounds, if they manage to get away. But that's a big if. Most builds that spec into high passive health regen also tend to spec into the Autotomy perk as well. This perk allows the user's appendages to break off if grabbed, allowing them to escape a grappling attack. This is a costly ability and one that I normally don't speak very highly of, but situationally it can be extremely clutch. Earthworms do not have this perk, and so when attacked, they often cannot do anything except tank the damage and try to burrow away. If that doesn't work, they're completely out of options. In D tier, we have the Leech. As the literal namesake for the term used to describe deliberately being carried by the rest of your team, I actually think leeches are done a bit dirty. Yes, many leech players do fit the description, attacking a player in a higher weight class and just coasting off the free XP. But there are plenty of leech players who play an honest, active hunting strategy and have to fight to survive, same as any other predatory build. Like most other aquatic builds, they thrive off of their strong matchup against low tiers like frogs, and spawn camp them mercilessly. Leeches share the same garbage base stats as most other worms though, and with lackluster defenses and mobility, they still get one-shot by fish, birds, and snakes all the time. Frankly, the parasite strategy might actually be the less viable of the two, as leeches are not well protected at all when attached to a host, and can easily get picked off by perceptive players. In C tier, we have the Horsehair Worm. This nematode takes the burrowing proficiency of the worm faction and uses it for an unorthodox purpose, burrowing into flesh. Horsehair worm players opt for the parasitoid game plan, infecting their hosts when they drink from contaminated water.
infected.
It then uses its burrowing ability to pierce the digestive tract and hide out in the insect's circulatory system, leeching XP from it as it continues its playthrough relatively unimpeded. But once the worm reaches its max level, it activates its special ability, Mind Control, to change the insect's quest objective marker to the nearest body of water. Once the insect player self-destructs, the worm burrows out of its body and continues with the rest of its playthrough. This strategy is incredibly effective and requires very little technical skill, as once you successfully infect a host, you can farm XP entirely AFK. Mind Control is one of the most powerful abilities in the game, and it's shocking the devs gave it to a random worm build. Still, as with any parasitoid playstyle, the main downside is that your survival is tied to that of your host. So if you pick a scrub, you might get one-shot when they accidentally wander too close to a spider's den. And this isn't just a hypothetical. In fact, in some servers, the fish player base is literally reliant on janitoring the self-destructing players. Still, at least by being an internal parasite, they don't run the risk of being picked off like the leech does. In B tier, we have the Fireworm, a marine build with excellent defensive stats. Fireworms have toxic spines, which inflict serious damage on any player dumb enough to attack them. This effect is powerful enough that even large tank builds cannot just eat the damage, and will learn quickly not to mess with them. Unfortunately for Fireworm mains, because their spikes are small and fragile, they cannot pierce thick chitin or keratin armor. This means any player with a thick exoskeleton can completely negate the Fireworm's defense, and crush them like they would any other worm. Some fish mains have also spec'd into the beak attribute in order to be able to do the same thing. Parrotfish and pufferfish are a huge problem for builds that rely on defensive abilities, as their powerful beaks can crush armor and don't take damage from poison spikes. So, Fireworms are untouchable to a lot of players, but there's enough counterplay prevalent in the meta right now that I can't give them a high tier rank. Also in B tier, we have the Tube Worm. Of all the lazy AFK XP farming builds in the game, there isn't a single one that goes to as extreme of lengths to do so as the Tube Worm. The Tube Worm has crazy high toxic damage resistance, not because it needs to tank venom damage, not because it preys upon builds that use poison for defense. No, the Tube Worm needs toxic damage resistance because its strategy is to set up shop next to deep sea hydrothermal vents and basically eat the sulfur jetting out from them. It absorbs hydrogen sulfide using its plume, and because of a special team-up ability they have with bacteria, they're actually able to use that as an XP source, meaning they don't even need to really eat at all. They don't need to find food, they just constantly absorb the noxious sulfur spewing out of these vents. Because the sulfide turns water around these vents toxic, the Tube Worm doesn't have to worry about attacks from predators. They do, however, have to worry about the vents shutting down. Hydrothermal vents do not last forever, and when they go dark, or erupt into lava flows, it's GG for entire colonies of Tube Worms. An incredibly effective XP farming technique, but like a lot of these types of strats, it works until it doesn't. In A tier, we have the Velvet Worm. This build has even worse defensive stats than the other worms, as it doesn't have the same slime coating that the others do. However, it makes up for it by converting that slime ability into one of the most unique abilities in the game, a projectile attack. The Velvet Worm can fire a glue-like slime from its papillae. This slime attack deals no damage, it's not toxic, and doesn't hit with near enough force to be threatening on its own. However, the slime is sticky and hardens quickly, debuffing the target's speed stat and potentially even completely immobilizing it. This slime is extremely strong once hardened, similar to Spider Silk in terms of what it's capable of immobilizing. Even builds with vastly higher power stats are not safe from being essentially frozen by the Velvet Worm's attacks. Now, while this is no doubt a powerful ability, it has plenty of limitations. It is woefully inaccurate and will struggle to hit smaller or evasive targets consistently. It is also relatively short-ranged, only being able to hit targets a few body lengths away. And because it doesn't deal any direct damage, even if the Velvet Worm manages to pin down a build like the Centipede or Scorpion, it'll still be taking on considerable counterattack risk when it tries to approach. And last in A tier, we have the Bobbit Worm. This build is easily one of the most terrifying things not just in the Worm faction, but in the entire game. The Bobbit Worm is a mid-sized benthic worm build which can burrow up to 10 feet deep into the ocean floor. However, unlike most burrowing worm builds, the Bobbit Worm is not a scavenger. It's not burrowing to look for food scraps or to escape predators. No, the Bobbit Worm is an ambush build. It lies in wait, and as soon as another player wanders close enough to its burrow, it strikes, using what may genuinely be the most wicked pair of mandibles in the entire game. These powerful jaws inflict devastating damage, while simultaneously hooking into their target so that it can be dragged down below the ocean floor, never to be seen again. Now, despite their ferocity, I don't want to overhype the bobbit worm. Though they are menacing, skilled players can play around their threat range pretty easily. Their low perception stats make them pretty inaccurate when lunging towards their targets. Their attacks are deceptively slow, and as long as you position yourself even slightly above the seabed, they should be reactable and easily dodged. Skilled fish players have even been known to drive bobbit worm players out of their territory by teaming up and mobbing their burrows. This requires a successful perception check with a pretty high DC, but if your party is competent enough, you really shouldn't have to worry about bobbit worms that much. Despite being easily the most terrifying build on this list, the bobbit worm's poor frame data and predictable game plan keeps it out of the higher tiers. And in S tier, we have the Hammerhead Flatworm. Flatworms are the solo hunters of the worm faction, and the Hammerhead Flatworm is one of the best at it. They're faster than other worms, which isn't saying a lot, but still, it's relevant. They possess a devastatingly powerful neurotoxic slime, the same toxin found in pufferfish and blue-ringed octopus, which they employ both offensively and defensively. But their most recognizable feature, their wide, flat head, was a bit of a gamble in terms of how they spent their evolution points. By speccing into the Hammerhead attribute, these flatworms sacrificed their ability to dig efficiently. But in doing so, they greatly boosted their perception stat. Similar to the Hammerhead shark, the flatworm's hammerhead is loaded with chemoreceptors, enabling the worm to track down prey by following its scent. In addition to their toxic defense, flatworms are the best regenerators in the game, able to heal all the way back to full health even when cut into tiny pieces. They can really only be permanently defeated by non-physical damage, such as dehydration, salt, acid, that sort of thing. Because it's borderline unkillable through conventional combat, the Hammerhead Flatworm is the only worm build to achieve the rank of S tier. The Hammerhead Flatworm's excellent tracking abilities ensure that even without eyes, it knows exactly where it's going. And even though I do have...
Spent a bit for the stream. Good luck.